right, everyone. Welcome back for part 2 of Mosaic this afternoon. We have another panel discussion, and I'd love to introduce the panelists to you. This panel is called Playing in the Uncomfort Zone, Business Essentials for Winning Organizations. It is a privilege first to introduce you to Keith Harris. Keith is a graduate of Florida A&M University, where he got his bachelor's degree in political science and minored in labor relations. He has enjoyed a 27 career in human resources and is frequently called on to speak on issues of leadership and management, as well as recruiting and job readiness. He currently serves as Vice President of Human Resources for Tampa Bay Sports and Entertainment, which includes the Tampa Bay Lightning NHL franchise, Tampa Bay Storm Arena Football League team, and he also is very active in the community, serving as a member of several nonprofits and charitable organizations, including the American Cancer Society Volunteer Board, Hillsborough Sickle Cell Association, George Edgecombe Society at Moffitt Cancer Center, and he also serves as chairman of the Mayor's African American Advisory Council. Let's give Keith a round of applause. Next, I'd like to introduce to you Scott Pioli, the Assistant General Manager of the Atlanta Falcons. Scott Pioli is entering his 25th season in the NFL. He's been named NFL Executive of the Year by national media outlets in 5 different seasons during his career. In 9 years with the New England Patriots as the VP of Player Personnel, Pioli helped the club win 3 Super Bowls, claim 4 AFC championships, and 6 AFC East titles. Pioli and Bill Belichick became the first personnel director head coach tandem in league history to win 3 Super Bowls during a 4-year span. In addition to his front office experience, Pioli spent the 2013 season as an analyst on NBC's Football Night in America and Sirius XM Radio. And Pioli also serves as an active member of the NFL's Bill Walsh Diversity Fellowship Advisory Council, helping to make the NFL a more diverse and inclusive league. While he's made his living in the arena of professional sports, Pioli is passionate about the importance of education, equality, and the arts. He supports a number of nonprofit organizations with focus on those 3 cornerstones. Pioli serves as the board of directors for College for Every Student, CFES, a nonprofit organization committed to raising the academic aspirations and performance of underserved youth. Let's give him a round of applause. And we are also delighted to have with us Melissa Proctor, the Chief Marketing Officer for the Atlanta Hawks Basketball Club and Phillips Arena. She began her career with Turner Broadcasting System, serving as Senior Brand Development and Strategy Leadership for Turner Entertainment Networks, Cartoon Network, and Turner Media Group. Proctor's professional achievements earned her recognition from a multitude of publications, including being selected to the Atlanta Business Chronicle's Class of 40 Under 40, landing on Rolling Out Magazine's list of the top 25 women in Atlanta, and receiving honors from the Atlanta Voice 50 Under 50 and Leaders in Sports and Aspire. She closed out the calendar year earning a mention on Inc.'s list of 17 inspiring women to watch in 2017. Proctor serves on the board for the Atlanta Beltline Partnership and in an advisory capacity for the Children's Museum of Atlanta Board. Theresa Wenzel was named president of the Atlanta Dream in March of 2016. She's a 21-year sports industry veteran and spent the previous 10 years prior to her role with the Dream as a top athletic administrator at Georgia Tech, joining the Yellow Jackets in 2005 before being elevated to the position of senior women's administrator in 2006. She was honored as the 2011 Administrator of the Year by the Women's Basketball Coaches Association, the WBCA. And during her tenure at Georgia Tech, Wenzel oversaw the women's basketball, golf, softball, men's and women's swimming, men's and women's tennis, men's and women's track and field and volleyball programs. Under her supervision, the Yellow Jackets women's tennis team captured the 2007 NCAA National Championship. And our moderator for this panel, Nzinga Shaw. Yes, but we have to take a moment to recognize Zing for putting together this amazing event today. You can only imagine the tireless effort that went into organizing this. But additionally, Nzinga Shaw is the Senior Vice President of Community and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer of the Atlanta Hawks and Phillips Arena organization. She's the first person to hold the CDIO position in the National Basketball Association. In her role, Shaw is responsible for developing and embedding diversity and inclusion best practices throughout the organization. She's designed a strategic, cross-departmental program that creates deeper cultural awareness and sensitivity. Additionally, Shaw serves as a member of the executive committee and provides guidance to the leadership team so that they can engender inclusion in every facet of the business. She's focused on building a foundation that will advance the strategy as a core component of the Atlanta Hawks and Phillips Arena brand and to drive the business. This initiative extends to fans, customers, community partners, and within the workforce. Shaw is a recipient of several industry awards, including the Network Journal 40 Under 40, PR Week 40 Under 40, the Atlanta Business Chronicle's Women Who Mean Business, Pepsi's The Recipe, and the National Medical Fellowship's 2016 Diversity Excellence Leader Award. She's also on the board of directors of Microsoft's Youth Spark Initiative and ADMAT, Atlanta Diversity Management Advocacy Group. Shaw is a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, and is a proud alumna of Spelman, as well as the University of Pennsylvania, and she was a study abroad scholar at Oxford University in the UK. It's a privilege to introduce Nzinga Shaw.
Thank you. Thank you, Sine, and thank you everyone for joining us for part 2 of this dynamic conversation. I have the privilege of talking with corporate executives about how they manage diversity and inclusion inside of sports organizations. So part 1 of this day was really talking with athletes about how they use their platform for social action, but a lot of times we don't talk to the executives that really shape how these programs play out in organizations and how we think about organizations. So thank you all for joining me. I'd like this conversation to be a little bit different than the first one. It can be interactive. So if I ask someone a question, but you want to chime in, please do. Let's keep it as fluid as possible. So this first question I'll ask to the group, and it's really about what roles do teams and leagues have in championing issues of social concern and social cause? Keith, you're nodding, so why don't you start?
Sure. First of all, can anyone hear me? Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Nzinga. This has been really enlightening and educational for me, and I'm just honored to be amongst such a distinguished panel of athletes and personalities and other executives. So I think that the answer to that question really is for us to acknowledge and understand that these entities, these sports entities, are really a part of the communities that they do business in, and so that helps, I think, to humanize what it is that we do and what we stand for. And so much of the community relies on us to provide entertainment, but also we have assets, and we have a building, and we have personalities and athletes, and we have things that we can use at our disposal to really reach pockets of the community that the normal public just wouldn't have an opportunity to reach. And so I think we have a very critical role in helping the community understand that we are a part of them, and to that extent we can utilize those assets to then create positive change. So.
Yeah, I agree completely. And as a matter of fact, when our owner, Tony Ressler, came on board, the very first thing he said to us is we are a community asset. And I wholeheartutely believe that, and I think through the work that we're able to do as an organization, but also through the individuals that make up the organization, our players, our coaches, all of our staff, I think that we have a responsibility, but at the same time, I really think that across the board, we can't just automatically assume that people will feel like because we're a sports team, we're supposed to take a particular stance. I think authenticity really matters a lot, and we have to come at it from a way that makes sense for our community, but as well as what we do as an organization and the brand that we've created.
And I'd agree, and obviously I'm a firm believer in the idea that to whom much is given, much is required. And we're given a platform with these organizations, with sports, and in all of our jobs, quite honestly, where we have a platform not only to do the right thing, to do good things, but we also have a lot of resources. And I don't mean necessarily just financial resources. As you mentioned, we have buildings, we have facilities, we have human resources that the communities that we serve us. So this needs to be a reciprocal relationship where we are constantly giving back, because everything that we are and that we have, we get from the community as well.
So, and
I would echo all that, and I would tell you, as being the president of the Dream for just over a year, what our players mean to the young girls of Atlanta has been incredible. And I think that in some ways that's been overlooked, because you look at so much of the sports for boys. But what I've heard and continue to echo to our players is what great role models they are to these young ladies. And for them to see the women be able to do things that you couldn't do 20, 30 years ago as a pro has been absolutely incredible.
thank you. Now, you all talked about community and the importance of your brand in community. But what about when there are challenges and barriers to making organic relationships with the community? So I'll pose this question to Keith, because historically the National Hockey League is not known as the most inclusive sports property, and it probably is very hard for you to reach minority communities. So talk about some of the challenges that you face in that space.
Well, as you mentioned, I mean, there's history, obviously, and there's a lot of history that doesn't lend itself to just being open and inclusive to African American and Hispanic kids that want to play hockey or they're interested in hockey. So the first thing we have to do is make our sport accessible, which is tough because you play it on the ice, and when that ice has to be created and maintained, and it's just not like a basketball court on any given street corner of a city or a wide open field. And so it's important for us for more than anything else, is to make our building and make our sport accessible to kids in the community. You have to grow the sport of hockey organically from kind of the kids up, just like any other little league sport like soccer or lacrosse. I mean, it's certainly gained more popularity. It's because the kids are playing it, and so that's what brings in the adults. So yeah, historically it just hasn't been a lot of access, and the other thing obviously is representation. So we don't have the benefit of having a lot of people of color or players of color for the community to identify with. And so one of those barriers is in the absence of that, how do we reach those pockets? And we have to educate sports fans around the game of hockey, which is a fascinating game in and of itself. If you're a sports fan especially, then you recognize the talent that it takes to be up on skates and to move as fast as you are and hit the puck and get hit at the same time. I mean, so once you start educating the public around just how fascinating a game and the athletic skill behind the game is, that makes it a little easier to kind of start tearing down some of the walls of separation between the races and the geography and the Americans versus the Canadians and internationally, et cetera. So it helps a lot.
Melissa, talk to us a little bit about why marketing is so critical to sports organizations having their brands recognized in the community. I mean, the Atlanta Hawks, we recently were recognized for our social good, and we put together the Unity Weekend back in October, and there were some great things that happened as a part of that activation, including our participation in Pride, including hands-on community service throughout the entire Atlanta metro community. But what role does marketing play in all of that?
Well, I think marketing works in collaboration with the rest of the organization. So any good marketing team works across the organization. I think even that example that you gave for Unity Week or Weekend, so much of that was born out of just the employees. So having people step forward and say, hey, we have a voice, we like to say something, and then being thankful for having a chief diversity and inclusion officer to help facilitate a conversation. none of the marketing works could happen without all of that other background work that really helps to kind of build a foundation of it. Ultimately, it's about bringing together all those parts and pieces, whether it's the community or brand communications and working with the PR team. I really see marketing as the spoke that understands what the audience needs. And I think in that example, it was internally, as employees, what's really important and what's valuable, and how are we really walking the walk. And so, working through the community team to say, all right, well, what can we do as staff that could really help us give back to the community and show how we want to unite the city of Atlanta through basketball. And then from there, whether it's pride and thinking of what sorts of, shirts we want to give away or, anything like that, just in terms of logo and design to kind of bring all those elements together. And ultimately, it's the execution. So the game in itself and thinking of the creative handles that will get people to understand not just what we're doing, but why we're doing it. And I think that marketing plays a big role in helping to bring all those pieces together.
Absolutely. Scott, well, before we talk to Scott, can everybody please give Scott a round of applause because of those Falcons. Those Falcons did so good. You guys made Atlanta proud. And we're just grateful for all of your hard work to you and the players.
Thank you.
Scott, you and I sat on a panel together back in May, and it was a really dynamic conversation. It was with Wendy Lewis, who was the head of diversity at Major League Baseball, and we were talking about diversity and inclusion and how you manage it in a front office environment. And towards the end of the conversation, I remember that you gave a charge to the audience, specifically to the white men in the audience. And you asked them to be very intentional about thinking about the people that they mentor. Be very intentional in picking people to excel through organizations and to be the next generation of leaders. Why did you feel compelled to have that conversation?
Well, we had this conversation at the table a little bit, and then it went further as our discussion went on. And I felt compelled because the reality is this, as we talk about changing things and making things better, making things right, primarily the people that hold the keys are dudes that look like me, right? Old white dudes. And we have a great responsibility by having those keys. And I made that charge for the specific reason is that if we are going to be agents of change, if we are going to make a difference and do the right thing and improve on so many levels, the people in those positions need to step up and not only mentor, but create opportunities. And part of what we talked about at this, on this panel is that there's people in leadership roles, again, that look a lot like me. And what we need to do is create opportunities. And the charge that I gave the group is think about if inclusion and diversity is important to you, what is your why, right? We all do different things in life. We all have different things that are important to us. And what really hit me years ago is, okay, what is my why? Why do I believe it's important to have gender diversity, for there to be racial diversity, socioeconomic diversity? What is my why? And it went back to just personalizing things. And I think if we all personalize things and understand why we have certain feelings that we do, the good and the bad, we come to a place where we can do more good and do more for the greater good.
Thank you. Theresa, you have been a top administrator for collegiate sports and professional sports. What do you see the difference between the way that sports is administered at the collegiate level versus professional, and how does diversity and inclusion play a role in both spaces?
Sure. So, at the college level, it's governed by Title IX. So a lot of schools have to do things based on Title IX. What I've seen in that transition to the pro level is that that's not necessarily the deal here, right? And so from a corporate partner standpoint is everybody thinks the dream is important to Atlanta, but from a sponsorship standpoint, the money's already dictated somewhere else. And so what I've seen is kind of that transition of, I almost feel like I've stepped into a time machine, I've gone back 10 years. And so when I came to Georgia Tech, we went through an NCAA certification. We evened the playing field because we went through that certification process. I'm taking a lot of the thinking that we did 10 years ago and modernizing a lot of what Georgia Tech did, and now trying to modernize the dream to be able to compete in Atlanta where you have a saturated sports market. But it's really important to the young girls.
And speaking of gender, Scott, you and I had a conversation about a hire that you made recently. You added someone to your scouting team that happens to be a woman. And I think that's tremendous and remarkable, but you didn't talk about her gender. You just hired what I think is the best person for the job and let her work speak for itself. Why didn't you take the opportunity to really make a big deal of her gender as opposed to other organizations that might hire a minority or a woman and talk about that a lot?
Yeah, I'm not going to take credit for how we handled it as an organization, because I made a suggestion that I believed was the right way to handle it, and Arthur believed in it, Thomas Dimitrov believed it, Dan Quinn believed it. So we had organizational buy-in as to the way we wanted to handle things. And I think if we're going to try to make things normal, we've got to normalize it ourselves, right? If you're doing it from the right place and doing it for the right reasons, there's no reason to put someone up on a stage and make a sideshow of it, right? Are we going to do the right thing, or are we not going to do the right thing? So the background is Katie Sowers, who we hired to work as a scout this year. She was brought in as part of the Bill Walsh Diversity Council Coaching Fellowship. So Dan agreed to allow us to have her as one of our intern coaches for training camp. And what we do on the personnel side and the scouting side is we usually have 3 interns also. And at the end of the training camp, we pick one of the 3 interns to be the person that's going to be a seasonal intern for us. And as we went through this process, the 3 young men that were given the opportunity to compete for the scouting position, truthfully, were not as good as Katie. Katie had background, she had played real football, tackle football for 9 years. She understood the game, she understood how to play it. She understood the X's and O's, she understood the commitment, she understood teamwork. She got it. She was, at the end of training camp, the most qualified person. So I went to Thomas and said, Thomas Dimitrov was our general manager, said, Thomas, this is the best person for the job. Oh, and by the way, I think this is the right thing to do. And it really wasn't that difficult, other than we had to go back and make sure that we were going to continue the plan. When we hired Katie to be a coaching intern at the beginning of the year, we knew that there was a possibility that people would recognize that she's a coach and working with the coaches and want to take it places, want to make it a big story. But we treated her just like every other intern. You know, there's been other situations where people are in positions like that, and either the individual club or the league, someone is trying to take that and, again, for lack of a better term, make it a sideshow to promote themselves, to promote their brand, to promote, to just really lack authenticity. And Arthur was tremendous about it. And he made sure the message, and Thomas made sure the message was, listen, we're going to do the right thing. We're going to make this normal. Let's just let it be normal. So here it is. Again, this is one of the first times we're actually talking about it publicly, is Katie has been with us since last June, and no one knows it. And she's done a great job. She continues to do a great job. And we just want to make it as normal as possible, because normal is what we want to be, right? We want to make a new normal, but it needs to be presented normal.
Sure, absolutely. I want to talk about tough topics and controversial topics and how our organizations approach them. So I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago when I started my job here, we toyed with the idea of marching in the Pride Parade. And we didn't know if it was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. We felt compelled to at least acknowledge the LGBTQ community. We know that this is something that means a lot to that community. And so we wondered if it was our place to even be in that parade. And we ultimately decided to participate. And then this year we participated in an even bigger way by building our own float and by really activating deeply in the community in more ways than one. This question is for Melissa and Theresa. You know, how have your organizations reached out to emerging communities and tried to partner with and even talk about topics that have been taboo in the past?
Sure. So for us, We didn't participate in October because our players were actually out of market at that point. But for the WNBA, they actually have a Pride game and a Pride week that we really focus in on. And so as an organization, we have a couple players that are openly out. And so this is a focus for us because we want to continue to grow that platform. Next year, the next 2 seasons, we play at Georgia Tech, so we're going to be in that Midtown area, and we think that's a great demographic for us. And we want to show that we're very accepting and inclusive. And so I think for us is that you'll see us be more aggressive within that space because it's really important, but also because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I think for us, I mean, very much the same story, and you mentioned the Pride Parade. It's interesting because you brought up, what happened 2 years ago and what the perception was from the Atlanta Hawks for the African American community. And I think internally, we always knew that we know who our target audiences are. And by really helping to define that and communicate that, not just internally, but then really developing a filter that we use whenever we're speaking about next generation Atlantans or multicultural audiences, really being true to ourselves and true to Atlanta and authentic through that lens. And I think for us, it's not necessarily that it's a taboo audience. It was the way that it was presented as the perception of what our organization said was truly not what it was. We acknowledge that a third of our ticket buyers are African American. And so in really developing strategies and community efforts to target the community in meaningful ways is important. But similarly with Hispanic audiences, we're in the process right now of doing the same thing and developing strategy at the very ground level and understanding how best do we approach this audience, talk to this audience, and develop meaningful relationships as opposed to looking at it as a one-off or just for sake of selling tickets.
So I want to talk about building internal teams and managing diversity inside of the organization from an HR perspective. And this question is really for Keith and for Scott. Because when you think about hiring and you think about top-tier positions that need to be filled, how do you go about having that conversation with your peers about searching for people from new and unexpected places that happen to fulfill top-tier and top talent positions?
Yeah, so, the interesting thing about that whole notion of representation, which is really the game changer. When you walk into a building, what is it that you see? We can talk diversity, we can have it in mission statements, and we can do things in the community, but when you walk in that building, if all of the employees look a certain way or don't look a certain way, then you're automatically going to start assuming that there's a lack of authenticity, like what you talked about. So representation is huge. For me, my perspective coming from years and years of corporate America prior to joining the Lightning, I've been able to tell a different story. Most industries will say it's a small industry, everybody knows each other in this industry. I've never seen it more prominent than in sports entertainment. So everybody literally knows everyone, or somebody who knows someone who knows someone. I mean, it's a very, very tight-knit community. So I think we fall into the trap a lot of times of thinking that someone's only going to be successful if they've come through this particular route or this road. And the error of that is most skills on the business side of the business of what it is that we do are transferable. If you're going to sell, you're going to market, you're going to HR, accounting and finance, most of those things are things that you can very, very easily learn across industries, and those skills are transferable into our industry. And so I have to make a case all the time for, if we have an opening for a particular position, let's expand our lens a little bit so that we can include some folks that may not have come through the same traditional route that they've come from, and that's tough. But I have to just kind of point to myself as an example of, I've been there 8 years now without having come from sports, and I think I've done okay. And so hopefully, that will open the doors to other folks who look like me, or who may be female, or who may be gay and lesbian, or whatever it is, that may open the door for some other folks to also be considered for these roles.
And you bring up a great point. The fact is, there's a lot of skills that are transferable. So within our organization, at the Falcons in particular, there's two different sides of the house. And what I mean by that, there's the business side, and then there's the football operations side. The business side of the operation, Arthur has done, has for years done a great job. As a league, however, where we have failed, and it's not always indicated, like I pay attention to the Lapchick report, and the Lapchick report talks about the different leagues and where people are doing a good job and when they're not doing a good job. And if you go back and you drill down even further with the Lapchicker report, you see that most of the executives that are diverse, they really are on the business side. What we've been trying to do, and what we're really trying to do, where the NFL needs to get better specifically, is doing a better job bringing people in on the football side of the operation. We need more coaches. We need more scouts. We need more people doing football operations, equipment, trainers. So there, what happens is these organizations have a separation, whereas the business side will look very diverse, right? Then you get to the football side, or the basketball side or the baseball side. That's where the divide really starts to happen. Something we're working very hard to do now, and is to, again, change football operations. And again, fortunately, we've got an owner and a group of people there who believe in this. The toughest part right now is creating the pipeline. The experience we've had this year with Katie has been, we're both keeping these documents of all of the obstacles that she's facing and that have come up, or just some of the things that are taken for granted, because we've got people who are generationally and for decades, it looked one way. Then finally, a number of years ago, it started to change a little bit, where we had people of color coming into the league, and we were doing a better job there. But now the gender thing takes on a different light, because we're introducing women who haven't lived in the culture, and there's certain things about the football culture that we take for granted, right? People who look like me take for granted, and it's an everyday life. And when you hire someone that has no real background in it, even though she's played women's football for 9 years, it's very different in this type of environment. So what we're finding is there's this incredible learning experience that's happening on both sides, not only for Katie, but everyone else in the building that's involved in the football operations. And this is, as we create a pipeline, these are all the ideas and the things and the bumps in the road that we're keeping a list of, that we're going to share with people in different settings and in panels like this. We've been doing it at the Pro Bowl. We had a panel down there that the NFL had for 250 women football players, and we just had another one prior to the Super Bowl, and we're having another one at the annual meetings. And what we're trying to do, though, is not only identify the people and create a pipeline, but there has to be this education that comes along with it. And part of the education, truly, is the culture that exists, and it's a very different culture.
Can I say something? Just as that was so great, because I'm actually a product of that, and it was so relevant, everything you just said, because in high school, I was an artist who loved basketball and wrote a bunch of letters to the Miami Heat to become a ball girl, or not even a ball girl, just to have a part in the organization. And they would write back and say, "I'm sorry, there's no opportunities for you. We don't have any. All we have are ball boys." And I was like, "Well, okay, sure." And I kept calling and being persistent. And one day the equipment manager called and said, "I don't know what to do with you, but if you'd like to come in for a preseason game, I'm happy to have you." And that day, the culture was something that they didn't understand, where I would play a role in. And at the time, only guys could get in the locker room. So, as a girl, I had to work on the court. So I just became the queen of the court. They taught me how to pass and rebound and help set drills for the players. And fast forward a couple years, when I looked in the basketball operations department there, the only women were assistants. And so I got to come in the summers and help do internships and just learn scouting, draft, free agency, and working through that. And ultimately, it's been able to get me where I am today. But without them taking a chance on me as a woman, just to come in and even a position as a ball girl, which didn't pay, volunteer. I mean, ultimately, it really does so much. And I think even for the people that are part of that organization to this day, we're like, "Oh, wow, look at you. We didn't know. It was so great. And we always knew you would be special." But if not given that opportunity, I wouldn't be here right now.
And to that point, what change is about? Within change, there's obstacles, right? That's why we aren't willing to change. So some of the obstacles that you talked about in your situation were the same obstacles that we considered when we brought in Katie, right? What do we do about the locker room? Players are naked. There's all these real things that you have to consider. And you could say, "Oh, that's a problem," and put your head in the sand and not address it. Or you would like to think that the people that are in these positions, that are making decisions, are smart enough to find solutions, right? That's what leaders do. Leaders are supposed to identify problems, have problems brought to them, and then come up with a solution rather than say, "Yeah, not a good idea, we can't do that." So we talked about all these things. Coach Quinn talked about what it was going to be like when she was coaching during preseason games. Okay, after the game, Everyone's coming into the locker room. All the coaches come in the locker room. What do we do with Katie? Dan's response is, she can come in the locker room. The player's response, she can come in the locker room. Because I think one of the other things that we're seeing here now is society is changing. You know, I think actually it was you that gave me the name, the old white dude, back in that panel originally. I believe it was you. But
that sounds about right.
People my age, you know, we see things through a different prism, I think. Yet, if you look at in college football, for instance, 70% of the college trainers, athletic trainers that work in football are women. Now, they're not necessarily the head trainers, but 70% of the people working on players with injuries in college football are women. So they've seen players. They've been in locker rooms. The players are used to them. And there's this generation that doesn't see things. There's players now that are growing up, all they know about the locker room is there are women in media in the locker room during the game, after the game, so be prepared, right? So we can make all of these excuses and we can talk about all these reasons why we can't do things that are old, or we can find workarounds. And what we were able to do with Katie is she came in the locker room. The players knew it. The players were in meetings with her. They knew, and they knew how to be respectful as well. And everyone was respectful. So it's just a matter of, again, yes, are there obstacles? Yeah, there's going to be. So think it through, but that's what leaders do.
So, and I'll take that one step further because we're talking about staffs. And so one of the most interesting comments I've heard throughout the last year is whenever we talk about bringing people to the game, I'll bring my daughters. And I'm like, is there some reason why your sons can't watch women's basketball? And so that's been a really interesting transition for me because I'm like, I've never had that type of segregation before in a sport. And so it's been interesting because I've challenged a lot of my male friends to say, bring your kids. And for their moms, bring your kids. It doesn't matter if it's a boy or girl. Let them see some really great basketball and some great athletes play.
Absolutely. And that's a great point because I want to talk about representation. I think a lot of times when we define diversity and inclusion, we define it in terms of representation in your organization. So if I have 4 hires to make and I hire 1 African American, 1 white person, 1 Hispanic, and 1 Asian, most people will say, well, she did a great job of managing diversity. But is that necessarily true? You know, if all those people grew up in Massachusetts and they all went to Harvard and they all like the sport of basketball, are we really going to get innovation from that group of people based on their representation? How do you guys answer that?
When I look to hire, I question people's backgrounds, where they came from, how they studied, their thought process. I don't generally just look at their appearance, and because if I'm surrounded by a bunch of people that think like me, we're not going to get a whole lot done. And so for myself, I really want a very diverse representation as far as experience. I want people that have lived geographically differently, have been raised differently, have eaten different foods, even spoken different languages, because we can learn differently. And what I've challenged my staff is if we continue to do the same thing, and our organization's only 10 years old, so we're still really young in this deal, but if we continue to do the same thing we did last year, we're going to get the same outcome. And quite frankly, I want to move the bar. And I think that that's a challenge for everybody. And when I was at Georgia Tech, it was really interesting because when I got the title SWA, which is Senior Women's Administrator, when I got introduced, everybody would always say, so you oversee all the women's sports. And I'm like, well, actually, I have both. I have 14. And so, I got to a point where I stopped responding that way because I'm like, if you want to think that narrowly, that's on you. But I'm really proud of the women that I represent. But yes, I also represent a bunch of guys as well.
Yeah, I think for me it's about diversity of thought, and even regarding the marketing team that we have, all different backgrounds, different age ranges. But when I even look at diversity and inclusion for myself, a lot of times I will drive into our arena and park in our reserved parking spaces, and the folks will look at me and the people who work there and they're like, I'm sorry, this is reserved for executives. And I would say, okay, all right. And then they'll look at my little parking pass and be like, oh, I'm sorry, okay, you're good to go. And I love it. I cherish it because it really shows me that, in terms of being stereotypical, in terms of what people would think of as a chief marketing officer of an NBA team, they don't see an African-American woman with locks and a nose ring and just having the opportunity to play the role that I am and be a part of the organization and still get respect based on the work that I'm able to do, but yet open doors and open people's eyes to, I think someone mentioned earlier, you need to see the representation for people to feel like it's possible. And when I go out and I'm able to speak and people can actually say, okay, wow, that's great. I look for that same thing in other people, because it's not just about how you look, or, it's about your diversity of thought and your experiences.
And I wanted to just add a quick comment as kind of an example of how important the inclusion piece of this whole diversity inclusion conversation is. And when we hired a consultant to come in and kind of do our initial, executive overview and kind of the focus groups with the staff, as a kind of the black guy working in hockey for the last 8 years, I'm going, this is great, because we hired this sister out of FAMU. She's on the thank you very much. And I was excited about that, because I was a FAMU grad, and she's going to come in and she's going to revolutionize, our team. But one of the things that I noticed is she was careful to do when she pulled those focus groups together is to ask the groups, what are the things that are standing between you being your best self in this organization? And that way we got this broad spectrum of thoughts and feelings and race and sex and gender and which part of the building you worked in and all of these other kind of things that sometimes water down the black and white of the diversity conversation, but it enabled us to really open our minds to some things that, again, looking through our lens, we may not notice some things, we may not see some things, and that's really important for us when we get into this space earnestly. We have to start thinking about, hey, what are really stopping our employees and our players and our trainers and our coaches from being their best selves in our organization, and really have the courage to face those obstacles as well.
Thank you. Well, we are running out of time, but I do want to ask each of you to leave us with a piece of advice that you could give to executives in this room for managing diversity within their organizations. And it doesn't matter their platform. They don't have to be sports organizations, but we all have seen a trend of D&I being managed internally and really just helping to produce great teams and high-performing teams. So what piece of advice would you give based on your work experiences at your particular franchise?
Well, I'm happy. I would just say listen, because I think when I first took this role, there's so many people in our organization that have something to say. And when things are happening in the world, we just kind of keep our heads down and keep working. But if you ask the question and say, how are you? How do you feel about this? If you just listen, it means so much, and you never know what can come of that.
So, and I would say two things. One is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And then the other one I would say is seek to understand before being understood.
I guess I would go back to, I cut myself off intentionally when you asked that one question. I would encourage everyone to think about, what is your why? If you're here for a reason, you're thinking about it, you're considering it, you're very involved. And I think we all need to ask ourselves the why, because when we ask ourselves, all right, why is gender diversity important to me? Why is racial diversity important to me? Why is socioeconomic diversity to me? Why is inclusion? All of those things, for me, I've dug down deep and found the why, and I have people in my life that are the reasons why. And I think when we do that and we put a face with it, right? Everyone thinks that, okay, my why is why in terms of gender diversity is because I have a 13-year-old daughter and is the love of my life. The real reason is I have two older sisters that one graduated in 1976, the other one in 1980. Both of them were far better athletes than me. Both of them were far better students than me, talented in every way you can imagine, far beyond me. But both of them stayed in our hometown and did not get athletic scholarships, which today they would have both been scholarship athletes in soccer. And their opportunities diminished significantly. And they stayed in the hometown. They got married or pregnant, or maybe the order was reversed. But I got an opportunity. But that's what happens when there's no opportunity, when there's not a bright light, right? We end up in places we don't intend to be. And unfortunately, that happened to my sisters. But because I could play football, and I was a dude, I got an athletic scholarship to go play football. I got out of our town. I got out of New York. And to me, my why about gender diversity, I just want to tell that story real quick, is about that truth. And I've got two sisters who had limited opportunities. They've overcome it in life. They've done far more than I could ever imagine. But I tell that story because that's my why in terms of gender diversity. We don't have enough time for me to talk about, my other whys. But I guess a long-winded question or thought to leave with everyone is find out what your why is. But don't just answer, oh, it's this person. Dig down as to what your true why is.
Yeah, and I would just, to recap kind of our original comment that I made and that Scott echoed as well, is just really just to think about, if you're an executive in sports, just think about, what you've been given, and think about the assets that you have access to. We're a community organization. We sell tickets and we sell sponsorship. Beyond that, we sell an experience, and it's very expensive. It's not a cheap ticket. So just keep in mind that what we offer to our communities is very, very unique. No one else has an opportunity to pull, in our case, 20,000 fans a night. In your case, 65, 70,000 fans at one time to deliver a message to them, to that audience, and just think about what a kind of a powerful mission that is for us to have, and a burden for us to have, and keep that in mind as you go about making yourself and your organization available to the broader community.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this amazing panel. Please give them a round of applause. You all have been courageous in your conversations, candid, very insightful, and I just really appreciate the time. I know that everybody in our organization, on behalf of our CEO, Steve Koonin, and everyone else, we appreciate your time and your honest insights. Thank you.